All right, it's 5:02, so let's go ahead and get this presentation going.
Okay. So we appreciate you all being here once again. It's been about 2.5 months since we had you all on the dais last. We have sent you a few materials. I apologize, you just got them. I was hoping we might get you that stuff a few days ago, but there's a lot of data to crunch, and our staff has been working pretty hard to put it all together into a presentation for you. So we will have the presentation, deliver that to you at the end of this for your consideration. There's quite a bit on community engagement in particular that you'll find in an email. Planning Commission got it from Karen, Council got it from me about engagement. You have a printed memo from Rob giving a brief summary about some of our engagement, some of the recommendations and outcomes from that engagement. What we as staff are thinking and might recommend for your consideration. Tonight, we'll go through some of that community engagement. We'll tell you about our process. We understand, at least from the council, and I'm imagining the commission as well, that the engagement piece is very important. We've been taking our time on this. We've been doing stakeholder interviews since last fall. We had our 2 community engagement forums, our roundtables a couple of weeks ago on July 6th. We've done an online questionnaire. And so we've really put a lot of effort, being very deliberate about trying to get all voices at the table. And I think we've done a pretty good job at doing that. So Grace is going to talk to you about what that process looks like. And then Rob is going to give you what it all means, what conclusions we took away as staff as we ground through all this data, what potential policy recommendations we would make to you all. And then you all, of course, once staff offers all that up, it's going to be up to you, of course. If you would like staff to go and get more data, if you have questions, of course, we're happy to do that. If you want to start talking about, hey, what are we going to do about this right here tonight? That's great too. It is our guess that you might want to do another session like this, another work session. Of course, that's perfectly fine with us as staff. We're here to support you however you need. If you do need to go over and take a little bit more time, please do so. Just let us know what you need from us. I know you're just getting a lot of this information right now, so that might be appropriate. But as I mentioned, we're trying to give you the full menu of options that we heard from folks out there and give you a recommendation, and it's yours to do with what you like. So any questions I can answer before I turn it over to Grace? All right, thanks.
Okay, hi, Council and Planning Commission. Thanks for taking the time. I know most of you, those that don't know me, I'm Grace Johnson. I'm the communications coordinator. So just again, thank you for those of you who've been involved in this process and for your enthusiasm to get community engagement, to garner community input on this topic, as it does affect the whole community. So really quick, I would just want to start off by what I'm going to go over and what you have in front of you. What you have in front of you is the first 12 or 13 pages of a 152-page document. The reason for that is because the full document contains all of the questionnaire responses. They're anonymized, of course. It also contains report from the community conversations. So that is very, very super detailed. And again, like Michael said, we will get that to you. What I'm going to go over today, though, is just the first, if you're looking at this table of contents, it's really going to be those first 2 sections. So for those of you that have been following along, I'll start with the background. Oops. And we're going to do. So like Michael said, we started this process really in November of last year. But the real work sort of started as far as the community-wide engagement in June and July. But what we set out to do was the goal of it was to solicit feedback from the community that would eventually inform a staff recommendation. So that's kind of what we stuck to throughout this process. Some of our objectives were to share information with the community, so it educate them on the existing conditions, limitations, potential options, that sort of thing. Collect and compile input, so that's the community input piece. Bringing people together, so that was the in-person roundtable, so they can kind of see other people's perspectives. And then just providing transparency, so just keeping them informed throughout the process. And of course, this document itself will be a public document, so this will be available on the website for them as well. And then for outreach activities, so this is just a little bit of background about how we brought awareness. Obviously, this was a pretty aggressive timeline. So we were motivated to get the word out as much as we could, any way we could. So what we did was we used What's Up Woodland Park, which is our community engagement platform, and we housed all the information there. So that's where we put, and that's this, a little screenshot of that is down here, but we put the project timeline, ways to get involved, the questionnaire, all of that. And then as far as getting the word out, we used pretty much every avenue we could. One of the things a lot of you saw probably, and hopefully, were the postcards in the mail. That those were direct mail postcards to Woodland Park residents to get people to take the questionnaire and or sign up for one of the in-person engagement opportunities. Just some data from the website. So the page had 1,049 unique visitors. So that's actual unique people. That's not total page visits. So that's how many people were aware of the project. There were 602 visitors that actually clicked on something. So those are unique people that clicked on something on the page. And then of course, 340 actually took the questionnaire. And then we did get 295 people that registered for the platform as a whole that we didn't have before, which is great for future community engagement because they're going to be on the email list to say, hey, now we're looking for your input on this. And they'll also get the emailed updates about this specific project. And then there were 63 people that pre-registered for the community conversations. And just before I get into this, so I'm going to go into the key findings here from the questionnaire. What I'm going to review are the first 2 questions. There's 16 questions on the questionnaire. The first 2 were open response type questions, which means that anybody could write whatever they want and there was no character limit. The rest of the questions were multiple choice. So the data is pretty straightforward. The first 2 are really what I'm going to focus on in my piece, and Rob is going to get into some of the other questions on the questionnaire. So like we talked about, there were 3 main engagement activities. The stakeholder interviews actually started in 2021. Those were one-on-one interviews with concerned people, whether that was hotel owners, managers, short-term rental owners, residents, other city staff, real estate agents, and a Chamber of Commerce. So we had one-on-one interviews with those folks. And then, of course, the questionnaire, which launched on June 15th and closed on July 14th. And the community conversations, which we talked about a little bit. Just for some background on the community conversations, those were on July 6th, 7:30 and 6 p.m. We had a few of you guys there, which was great. But they were each a little over 2 hours, depending on how it went. But each table had 4 to 7 people. They were randomly assigned as they walked in. We wanted people with different perspectives at each table so that they would have something to talk about, really. So a staff facilitator was assigned to each group, and they had prompts to kind of lead that conversation. And what they went over were the benefits, concerns, and impacts of short-term rentals. And then they brainstormed creative ways they could fairly address any concerns that were brought up within the group. So we had 340 total questionnaire responses, 56 community conversation participants, and then 10 stakeholder interviews. So just a little bit of, we're going to get into the questionnaire first. So a little bit of demographics here. Again, there were 340 unique responses, and all of the anonymized responses can be found in the appendices of the document that you'll be emailed. The 86% of the respondents said that they live in the city of Woodland Park. And then a little over 50% of respondents were between the ages of 53 and 72, but the total age range was 23 to 82. So it was quite a wide margin there, which was good. So with the key findings that I'm going to go over, just kind of a little bit of background on how this came to be. But like I said, these were open response type questions. So they could type whatever they wanted and there was no character limit. So question number 1 and number 2, each of those questions had 325 total text responses, which is a lot of information. Some of them were 2 words, some of them were 3 paragraphs. So in order to make that a little bit easier for you all and the rest of the public to digest, what we did was we went through each response and tagged them based on content. So each response was reviewed. So I read through every single response. So for the first question, which was what concerns do you have, if any, with short-term rentals in Woodland Park, there were 325 responses. So what I went and did is I read through every one and I started tagging them. And some of the responses have multiple tags. Some of them hit every single category. Some of them only were 1 word or they were a question. A lot of those ended up in other. If it was too hard for me to decide what they were trying to get at, I would just put those in other. And all the responses were completely anonymized again. But so I'm gonna just pull this up. So I kind of went through and of course I made this graph that you're looking at up here. So you can kind of get an idea of what the main concerns that were mentioned were. So the first one, many of the responses mentioned community character as a concern. So these were any responses that mentioned like lack of neighborliness or degradation of neighborhoods, interruption to their daily life, or just general uncomfort with not knowing their neighbors. And then the second category was nuisance type concerns. So that's those two, the 2 bars. So under community character, noise, partying, traffic, and parking. Those are what I considered nuisance type concerns. And those were also highly mentioned. So those comments were also often paired with the concern that there wasn't a point of contact when they did have a nuisance type concern. Responses tagged no concern indicated that they didn't have any concerns, were unsure, or that they feel that short-term rentals are beneficial to the community. Housing stock and affordable housing were also up there. Many respondents indicated that they're concerned that short-term rentals negatively impact the availability or affordability of homes for new homeowners and long-term renters. Fire and wildlife were also one of them. They were concerned that tourists weren't educated on the rules or weren't respecting burn bans or didn't understand what to do in like an evacuation, that type of thing, just lack of education there. And then of course, interactions with wildlife. So the tax one, any of the responses that were tagged tax were concerns either that they should be taxed more, they should be taxed less, they should be taxed differently based on private ownership versus ownership by a commercial investment group, that sort of thing. And then purchase of properties for STR use by commercial entities or like big, large investment groups. That was also one that was mentioned. And then there were so the ones that were tagged property rights were comments that didn't reference any specific concern or benefit. They were concerned about overregulation or property right infringement. So that's just an explanation of that. And the intent again is just to help you. I would encourage you to read some of these responses. It was really helpful for us as staff to go through that, but it is a lot. So I just kind of wanted to make it a little bit easier. And so question number 2, same thing. What are the benefits, if any, of a
Grace,
short, yeah.
Before you go on to 2.
Yeah.
On number 1, community character, can you embellish on that? What is that? What range of definition did that mean for people?
So that was primarily comments that were like kind of vague, but leaning more towards like degradation of neighborliness. Like they didn't like transient people in their neighborhoods, and they felt that it negatively affected their neighborhood or their relationship with their neighbors. So that's why like all of those were tagged, anything tagged like that. It really were people just mentioning, I don't want an STR in my neighborhood type of sentiment. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Neighborliness rather than any sort of regulation or any sort of code issue or any.
Yeah,
sort
like
of-
they maybe didn't mention, I think that this should be in a, I think it's against our code or it's a residential zone. It was more comments that just said, I don't want an STR in my neighborhood, but they didn't elaborate.
Oh, my question. Thanks.
Again, so benefits, many of the responses mentioned revenue as a benefit. So there were 3 different categories of revenue that were mentioned. The first was the city. So that was referring to sales or lodging tax to the city as a benefit of STRs. And then revenue businesses, mentioned revenue to local businesses, restaurants, et cetera, as a benefit. And then the third category was revenue owners. So that is mentioning income to STR owners as a benefit. And many of those ones also mentioned that local owners use the revenue that they get from their STR to put back into the local economy, to supplement their income, to afford to live here. That was mentioned alongside that one a lot. And then one other thing, and this was, it's a little difficult to quantify, but the idea that STRs provide a unique experience that traditional lodging doesn't. So a lot of people mentioned that the STRs bring different amenities. They have better options for families. Some hotels don't allow pets, so this would allow them to bring their pets. Personalized experience and ability to live like a local. That came up quite a few times. So again, that's one that I tagged any of them that said, short-term rentals are a unique experience. I kind of tagged them that way. And then sort of similarly, but separately, responses included additional lodging options as a benefit. So this would just be lodging stock, not like having a different experience, but actual options for lodging. They mentioned that STRs supplement lodging availability on the busy weekends, and others mentioned that STRs attract people that may not choose to come here if they only had the option of traditional lodging. Responses tagged tourism contain sentiments that short-term rentals increase tourism. So there were a lot of comments that basically just said they bring new people into our economy and they bring tourists here. There was also mention of property beautification as a benefit. So a lot of the respondents mentioned that ICR owners are incentivized to keep their place nice, to take care of their property in order to get good ratings on the apps that they use, and to attract renters, honestly, because if you don't have pretty pictures of your VRBO, no one wants to stay there. And then property value contained comments that STRs increase property values as a benefit. In the concerns property values, the property value tag is different because these mentioned increasing property value as a negative. So that's, and you can come back to that if you have any questions on that, but the way that it's tagged in the concerns question is separate from the benefits. And then again, this one, the property rights one is exactly the same. So any questions on that part of it at this point? Okay, so the community conversations, again, I explained those a little bit, but this it was difficult to write like a summary of these because there were so many unique perspectives, and it would honestly just be impossible to fully capture the exact unique perspectives of every single person that was there. But it was definitely a diverse mix of opinions. We had a healthy mix of STR owners and residents and local business owners. And so that was wonderful. But again, if you, in the appendices of this document, the community conversations report is on page 150, and that covers all of the notes from all the staff facilitators for their group. So that's summarized in the last pages of the report. So you can actually go in and deep dive into that if you're interested. But I would say that many of the STR owners were concerned about potential regulation. They were concerned about the impacts that it might have on their livelihood and those benefits that we talked about earlier that STRs do bring to Woodland Park. And then many of the residents that were there were those who had experienced the negative impacts of short-term rentals, and they just came to share their experiences. And just really, regardless of the strong opinions on both sides, everyone was, for the most part, was in favor of striking a balance. People want a fair solution that will allow local short-term rental owners to continue operating and bringing those benefits, but not negatively impacting their daily lives. So that was kind of the consensus. And again, you know, some people may not totally agree. Like there were a few one-off people that just didn't believe in any regulations at all and didn't think it was the purview of the local government. But there, you know, a lot of the groups came up with creative solutions to these problems. And I would encourage you to go read the community conversations report to explore those creative solutions. And again, that's available in the appendices of this document. And the blank questionnaire is in here, as well as the full demographics and all those responses. So you will get that email to you. Any questions on the community engagement piece of this? Okay.
Thank you, Grace.
Give me 1 second to move everything here.
How many hours does that take, Grace? And categorizing. Yeah.
It was kind of fun though.
Need it out of my reach. All right, hello, Planning Commission, City Council. It's good to talk to you again and ready to go over some of the things that Grace got from that conversation. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, talk about some of the things that we got from that, and then what, just give some recommendations on moving forward. And sorry, if you don't recognize me, Rob Phelps, Assistant to the City Manager. And all right, so first, the definition. So since I talked to you on May 5th, these changed a little bit. So we changed the definition of a non-owner occupied STR, and then and we added how we define primary residence. So this what this doesn't include too is kind of another group, which is just people that rent out a room in the back of their house. Like, you know, they have an extra room and they rent it out as a short-term basis, whatever. And you know, from the people that we talked with during this process, there wasn't a lot of concern about those people that were just, hey, I'm renting out a room, versus people that are doing this every day and they're renting out their whole house, things like that. So Yeah, these definitions change a little bit. If you want to take a look at those last two, they're a little new. Okay, so here's some current stats, and these have also been updated since May 5th. And I updated these on July 18th, which was the last day that anyone could apply for a license for because of the moratorium. So these numbers should be pretty stagnant. But right now, we're sitting at 188 current STRs in the city of Woodland Park that are licenses in the city of Woodland Park. So if you'll notice here in 2019, there's 62. That's because some of those are from before 2019. So we started keeping track of them in 2019. So that number is 2019 plus everything that came before. And then if you look in 2022, we're at 67, 32 of those we got in the 7 days after the moratorium passed to the 7 days that it was closed. All right.
Rob, those were applications, not necessarily the license being issued, correct?
So those licenses are active. So they
That's what I
applied, they
mean.
were approved.
They're active.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Rob,
Yes.
do you have information on what's the share of these STRs that are owner occupied?
So that I don't have, and I'll get into that here in a little bit too, talking about what we can do better to have a better, clearer picture of that. So our approximate potential build out. So this is everything based off of our zoning, the water that we have available. If we built out everything that we can build in the city of Woodland Park, right now that's estimated at 3,478 dwelling units. That would be 188 of those would be 5.4% of our build out. Currently, we're built out at 2,478 dwelling units, and 188 licensed STRs is 7.6%.
Rob, how many of those are multifamily dwelling units? Did you count those
Again,
separately? You did
Like,
not?
like, in order for me to do that, I'll have to go through 188 addresses and add them, look on the county assessor site and figure that out. And I agree, it is something that we do need to know, just I haven't had the opportunity to do it yet. And then it's another thing in what I'll talk about, like the way I think we should go forward with our licensing, that would kind of clarify that, or at least make it easier to track. All right, so in the survey that Grace addressed, we had a section, it's called competing priorities. So we came up with some effects of short-term rentals and some pros and cons that kind of, they can't coexist. So it's like if you know, I value time and money, then I can't give all my time, or if I take all my time, I'm gonna lose all my money. So it's kind of the same principle. These more of one depletes the other and vice versa. So we looked at 7 different priorities and we talked about whether or not they were conflicting. So they either agreed with each other or supported each other, they conflicted with each other, or there was no impact. So of the ones that conflicted, we went through and we asked the questions, hey, you know, what's your choice? What is most important to you? You know, most effective use of your land, or the long-term rental housing supply is an example of some of the questions. So I'm going to go through these. So I also handed you, do you have a sheet that looks like this? Because I know that little thing printed out on 3 slides per sheet is pretty small, but you can read the definitions here. I'll go over them really quick. But so what we came up with, most effective use refers to a property owner's ability to use their property in the most efficient way to generate a profit. Long-term rental housing supply refers to the number of dwelling units available for long-term housing. And community character that Grace referenced to is, this refers to the idea that Woodland Park is built on a foundation of neighborhoods where inhabitants know one another and ample provisions are made of the diversity of working classes that contribute to a successful community. Safety, kind of common sense, but this is reference. A lot of people talk about safety. It's just talking about wildfires, wildlife, things like that. Occupancy comes up in that. Equity refers to comparisons between short-term rentals and hotels, as well as between short-term rentals themselves. So you guys all are pretty familiar with the difference in residential versus commercial property tax, and that's kind of what that talks about. Increasing property value and affordability. So those are complete opposites of each other. And we just ask people, what's most important, that you get an increase of your property value, or that, homes are more affordable. So we ask all these questions, and here's the quick answers. They're really easy to read. I'm going to go through them pretty quick. But so long-term rental supply is in the purple here. Most effective use is in the tan. And you can see it's 59% long-term rental supply. So community character is in the purple at 69%, and most effective use in the tan at 31%. So safety in the purple at 76%, and MEU is in the tan at 24%. Equity is 58%, and MEU is 42%. Housing affordability in the purple is at 60%, and MEU is in the tan at 40%. And increased property value versus equity. So you have increased property value in the purple at 54, and equity at 46 in the tan. Increased property value versus affordability. Increased property value in the purple at 48, and affordability at 52.
Rob, would you help me understand
Yes.
what those all mean? How you determine?
All
Just
of
help
them?
me understand
One in
what
particular.
it means.
So we just went through and so what this is it's like, we just wanted a little bit better idea of what is important to the community, because that's something that we struggled with, even in the community discussions. It's like Grace said, a benefit, so somebody is a con to somebody else. So learning what your perspectives are, what the community's perspectives are, knowing what's important to them kind of helps us understand why something's good or why something's bad. So it was just kind of an idea to figure out, hey, what are the values of the people in the community, at least the respondents to the survey.
So this is based on responses to the survey.
Yes.
That's where the data came from, that you calculated these.
Yeah,
Okay.
these were questions. So
Okay.
the question was, what is most important to you? In this case, safety versus most important or most effective use of
I
your
got it now.
property.
Thank you.
All right, so the anomaly from this is MEU was kind of contradicted everything. So everything went up against it, and pretty much in every case, it was the other item was deemed more important. Okay, so talking about the benefits. So this is something that we haven't talked about a lot, and it was brought up in the community conversations that people felt like, we weren't spending enough time talking about what benefits STRs bring. So I want to make sure I put that up front here, because it's undeniable that there are tons of benefits to STRs and what they bring. So these aren't in any particular order from the survey, but I'll talk about tax revenue, supplemental income first, because I can kind of quantify those a little bit for you. Increased tourism dollars, the benefits to the local economy. That happens. You can't deny that people are coming here to stay in short-term rentals, and they're obviously spending money in our restaurants and businesses. And it gives an alternative lodging experience. Also, just comes from the survey. People talked about, hey, people want to come up here. They want to be immersed in the community. They don't want to be a tourist in a hotel. So that's where that came from. But those last two, I can't quantify that for you, but I can the first two. So here's our tax revenue. So this is 2021, 2022. This is a percentage comparison between lodging and short-term rentals. So you can see as it started out, short-term rental percentage has grown in comparison to lodging quite significantly, starting about January of 2021. But you can see these in percentages. And then here, and this is lodging tax revenue. Sorry if I wasn't clear on that. So supplemental income for STR owners. So you can see in the middle column here, this is what has been collected for lodging tax in 2022. So from January through June, it's $91,000. And then knowing the tax rate, then we can estimate that estimated sales are at $1.6 million. So that's $1.6 million. And then, taxes come out of that. If they host on Airbnb or VRBO, it's usually about a 3% that they lose. Then they pay people to do maintenance on these homes, and they pay people to clean these homes. So those are costs that go into that too. The thing about those are those people that do the maintenance and they do the cleaning are usually Woodland Park residents. So those are jobs being created for people here in the community. And then that's money that's getting pumped back into the community. You can see $91,000 went back to the city in lodging tax that gets reinvested into the community. So a lot of that, there's just a lot. And then assuming that these owners are residents, then the remainder of that at some point gets brought back in as well.
Rob, on the previous slide, is that heads to beds? Is it short-term rental versus traditional motel and hotel?
Yes.
Okay.
And
All right.
Rob,
so-
Rob, on that slide there, do you have an idea of what the staff costs are to administer
I do
these
not,
revenues?
like what it costs someone to run a short-term rental.
No,
Oh.
staff costs. What's it cost the city to administer this program? The idea of collecting the taxes and doing the licenses, et cetera.
I don't know if we track that separately. That's something else that we should probably consider for the future. And not to scoop Rob, but if there are regulations put in place that may require additional help to enforce whatever regulations are in place.
So that's the source of my questioning. Yeah.
Okay, and I'd look at Aaron, do we have any way of knowing how much time we spend on STR currently?
We currently have one FTE that handles all sales tax.
But aren't lodging taxes reported on the same return with sales tax?
They are,
So it's
yes.
one return that's data entered.
Correct,
So it's really nominal
correct.
from what
I would agree.
So here's some analysis of some further questions. So these are things that we've talked to the community about in a second. Like these are things that we can do kind of internally, the first two, without making it's just separate from our communications, but updating the city code. As a new innovation, STRs aren't really, they're not really supported or they're not really addressed in our code. So updating the code to add that language, add it in the use tables. Where can STRs exist? Where can they not exist? That stuff would be, it would be nice to get those updated. STR specific business licenses. So right now, when someone applies for an STR license, they're applying for a business license that just happens to be an STR. So it's the same questions. So creating a specific STR license would allow us, we can ask some different questions. We can track, hey, where is this and what zone is this home in? Things like that. That's why it's hard for us to tell you what zone these people are in or what zone these homes are in, where the owners live, because it gets a little bit weird. It's not just it's using a regular business license form to do something that's not for a regular business. So by updating that, we can improve our tracking and be able to give you a clearer picture and make you a little more situationally aware.
Rob, when you put down as a new innovation, what is the time span that you're considering a new innovation? Because short-term rentals have existed for decades.
Right. So around 2019, when Airbnb and VRBO really kicked up, like that's what jump started it. Airbnb and VRBO gave people the ability to just, hey, all I got to do is call these guys and give them my address, and now I got a business. That's when that really caused this to skyrocket. Otherwise, it was just a mom and a pop in a house trying to do their own advertising and try to do all that stuff. I mean, technology is what made this jump.
Isn't it at least arguable that the current code does in fact address these and in fact prohibits them all, except in commercial zones? Yeah, I think that's what people said, but it just to be clear to everyone listening too.
That's
I-
one interpretation and application of the regulations. But in terms of a true definition of specifically a short-term rental, we do not have one documented in our regulations. So that's when I like to say that the code does not specifically address STRs.
Okay,
There's the ability to try and apply other definitions around how things are being used, but that was not the direction that the city has gone over the past couple of years, which is why we have the current situation. So I would actually recommend having specific definitions for STRs.
Okay, because currently there is a definition for bed and breakfast,
Yes.
which sounds exactly like what these things generally are. It's a residence used primarily as a private residence which offers sleeping accommodations to guests for a fee.
But Lee,
I mean, that
I
sounds-
understand it's not like math where A equals B, ergo B equals A. In the English language, when you have a term and you define it, it doesn't mean you can take the definition and then arbitrarily assign it to anything. It doesn't, law doesn't work that way.
Maybe, I think that the key point is that it's at least arguable, the point I'm making, that one way or another, the council needs to take some action to adopt an ordinance which says, this is okay, it's not okay, or there's some portion of it is or it isn't too. As it is now, it seems it's best confusing, because they arguably prohibited.
And I think what staff's trying to say is that there are some references in the code that can be paired up with what's going on. But to be clear and communication being clear and in writing for everyone involved, it would be a good idea for us to specifically identify what it's defined as and to create some regulation and classification so that it's clear to everyone. And we don't have individual interpretations. We have specifics, and then there's not a question. Is that fair?
It's absolutely fair. I mean, that's why I assume you guys enacted a moratorium last week, is because it is confusing. And I would hope at this point in time, at a minimum, we would update the city code. And I would hope our city attorneys are working on something, because this is a 90-day moratorium. Put ourselves in a sticks here if we don't do something within 90 days.
So for me, I'm going to disagree that the code has room for interpretation, because I have for 20 years been told by planning commissions in the past and a planning director that if it's not explicitly defined in the code, it is not allowed to be, it's not a valid use. So trying to apply a code that doesn't exist, to me, just doesn't make sense. I mean,
Catherine, I can tell you.
I'm just telling you my.
I know you may have been told that, which is disappointing that you were told that, but that's not the way laws work. And if you look at the code, nowhere does it explicitly say you can live in a single family house. So just because it's not there does not mean it's not permitted. There are certain things that precedents over time, there's assumptions made that you can do things with a house. And if we need to clarify this situation in Woodland Park, we need to be very.
I'm not arguing that we don't clarify.
Yeah,
it.
but-
I'm just saying that in my view, it's not allowed use at this point. Because it's not
that's-
in the use table.
that's a moot
just
Okay,
my-
that's your view.
Can I-
That's fine.
Can I
Yeah.
help and just say
Point
that
made.
what it's been and what it
It's-
has been and where we've been is really not relevant, because what we're trying to do is move forward with some regulations that clear up the mud.
And
So
I
if we
go
could
back to
focus
my
in that
initial
direction, that
question.
would be
Is our
helpful.
city attorney working on something?
Carol, I don't think she can.
I think they're working on recommendations.
Nina is here on the call or on the Zoom, excuse me, with us. We were hoping to have a little bit more direction before we start
Yeah.
writing something in.
Well, I'm all about plagiarism. If there's another community that's got a great
Well,
definition.
I am too. That's the right way to do it. However, we need some decisions made first.
Yes, right.
We have some recommendations for both of y'all, all y'all. But we would like some direction before we invest Nina's time, which we do pay for hourly, by the way,
Oh, that's right.
before
Unless
we
we
go
had a
too
city
far down the
attorney.
road. Yes.
I know Karen wanted to add.
I just had one last thing to kind of add to that context, is when it comes to single family homes or, individual dwelling units, we do not regulate the length of time in which those units are rented out.
Right.
So whether it's a 6-month, a 12-month, a 1 night or a 1 week lease, We do not address that at any level. So that's where all of that grayness happens and kind of how we ended up here tonight. And so Rob has more information I know he wants to present to y'all. Hillary.
Can I just ask, I want to go back and just a couple slides to your tax slide you had for the income. And I'm not going to put you on the spot because I know you don't have this information, but could you please find out what a family of four pays full-time living in a house compared to a half-empty SDR tax-wise?
What if
How
the
would
house
you
is already
suggest that
paid for?
happens?
Yeah.
What's that?
That's all over the board.
Yeah.
Not,
I
well,
don't
he's using restaurants and other places to get this, are you not? Or is
No.
this just the licensing fees? Just the taxes from the days? So every day they pay the tax. This is all it's calculated. This
So
isn't, this
when-
doesn't show any of the restaurants they're eating at or
No.
any of
No.
the other things.
This is just lodging tax collected for
Right.
short-term rentals, not hotels, not anything else, just lodging tax from
Okay.
short-term rentals.
All
right.
Rob, I do have
Yes, sir.
a question on slide number. Well, I can't tell you what slide number. It's the current statistics where you said that the approximate potential build out is 3478. And currently we have 5.4% are licensed as STRs. Do we have any data on what is considered normal in a city? And then what would be considered what percentage would be considered beneficial to the city? Or what percentage would be considered detrimental to a city? Do we-
So it's
I mean,
different. I do some comparisons. Manatee, it's like 2%. Breckenridge, of course, is a lot higher. That's kind of what their part of their economy is based on. On average, it's usually between 5 to 7%. And then some do it by zone, so you can have more in one zone, less in another. It's just no two communities are the same. So what works for one is not going to work for the other. But like I said, usually, I don't know, 3 to 7 probably is about the average of the ones that I've seen. And that's. of
But
their
my question
current
is,
build.
okay, so that's the range, the normal range. But are there any studies that say if you go less than this, it's considered detrimental to a municipality? If you go above such and such, it's considered a benefit?
No, I haven't seen that, but again, I think it would have to be specific to our city.
That's pretty subjective. Let's let Rob go ahead and carry on with his presentation.
Okay. All right, so STR business license, I kind of talked about. We just, here at staff, like if we change the way we collect information, we could improve the way we can give it back to you. So then nuisance complaints or something else, like these are already addressed, like, you know, all the complaints about noise, parking. So all the complaints about noise, the complaints about parking, the complaints about people renting out STRs as RVs in their driveway. Like those are all addressed in our laws. So they're already covered. They just need to be enforced. We need to know about them in order to enforce them. And then another thing that was brought up in a lot of the discussions are holding owners responsible. So if an STR, someone staying in an STR gets the police called on them for breaking the law, whatever thing, and you know, they get reprimanded, they learn their lesson. Hey, we won't do that again next week when we're at another STR, but it doesn't do anything for the neighborhood there. So the people that are getting cited are leaving and being better people somewhere else. But it doesn't change. New people are going to come in the next time and you're going to have the same problem. So it's a reoccurring issue. So some of the thought with the discussions was that by placing holding owners responsible puts a little bit more onus on that owner to make sure that their tenants are doing what they're not supposed to be doing and they're obeying the law. All right. So here, this is just a little bit of feedback. So here people were given the question of how important they thought something was. So for instance, here, how how important is it to you to address the property tax discrepancy between hotels and short-term rentals? And as you can see here, it's not a huge amount. Like, people aren't really concerned that hotels are paying 29% and STRs are usually paying a residential tax of 7.15. Even hotel owners, when we did our stakeholder interviews, like, it was just no big deal to them. It didn't really matter. So this was a question that we asked. It just came back to, it's like, hey, I don't really see a need to even address this. But if you wanted to, you could, with fees to offset, change how much you collected from fees for STRs. But like I said, the community doesn't seem to have any interest.
Rob, can I ask you, when did you ask the business owners?
So like the hotel owners, that was back in December, January. Yeah, it's been a while.
I think the chamber's given us some stats now that are somewhat significantly different, so maybe we can revisit that.
Okay. So good neighbor guidelines are a huge, very popular conversation across the board. Everybody is on board with these. STR owners especially are on board with these because most of them do this. And it's like, hey, you know, we do what we do because we love our neighborhoods. And they're, you know, they want to make sure that everybody is responsible for doing these. And it involves things like quiet hours, maybe having a flyer in the house or a book of flyers that talks about, hey, these are the restaurants you should check out, or letting them know, hey, these are the things that you can do in the community so that these people can participate. Explaining where they can park, where they can't park. And then having a local representative. So this is a pretty common theme across different municipalities, and it varies from someone who needs to respond within an hour to someone that has to respond to a concern within a week. But having someone there, like, you know, 24 hours maybe is a good idea, but just having someone on board. And you can see like 84% of the people said this was very important, and then another 11% said it's somewhat important. So safety protocols, interesting, like if you look at Grace's breakout, like safety received 9 comments, that's pretty low. But if you look at some of the things that are above that, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about safety. So fire education, wildlife education, those land a little bit higher on the list. Having a posted evacuation routes, having occupancy limits. You know, it's like how many people is too many? What's a fire hazard? Things like that. Again, the community, 79% are on board with this. Addressing owner occupied versus non-owner occupied. And there's a lot of division here in the community, like half care, a little bit more than half. It's important that we address that. And then the other, just a little less than half, aren't as concerned. So the biggest thing though is this may be your best tool to affect the commercialization of residential zones, which is a relatively significant concern from the community. All right, so coming up with some recommendations, like what we did is we took all these benefits that we were given throughout this engagement process and the things that we want to get rid of, the negative externalities, the concerns, and how do we mitigate those negatives and still maintain the positives? So let's not lose this. I mean, yeah, we could say no more STRs in the city and you wouldn't have any of the problems, but you would also lose all the benefits that come along with it, and vice versa. You could go the other way and let them do what they want, and then you would have more of the negatives. So our first recommendation is updating the city code, like we mentioned. And that's something we can talk about further, what that looks like. But that's a pretty important thing to do to specifically address short-term rentals. Add them to your usage tables. Say, hey, these are permitted in these zones. They're not permitted in these zones, or whichever direction that you want to take it, just adding it to the code. Separate STR licenses from business, separate STR licenses from business licenses. We've talked about that. That's just going to enable us to give you a clearer picture and increase your situational awareness about what's going on. I'll be able to look at a chart and tell you this is how many that we have in this zone. I'll be able to say this is how many people, how many owners we have from out of state. This is how many owners live in the city, things like that. Another thing is prohibiting subleasing for STR purposes. This is just like, I can't rent property from you and then turn around and rent it out as an STR. Off-street parking is another common thing, and they usually base this off of bedrooms or ever how many vehicles that they're allowed to bring. So, if you have a larger house and it says, hey, you can bring 3 vehicles to this property, then there should be a place to park 3 vehicles off the street. And then occupancy limits based on bedroom space. So what's really common here, it's usually things like 2 people per bedroom plus 2 is kind of a common theme across other cities. Having a 24-hour contact we talked about earlier, just someone that can respond, whether or not that's a neighbor, maybe that the STR owner has talked into doing this for them or is paying them to do this for them. But it's somebody that can respond if a neighbor has a complaint, or maybe if the occupant has an issue and needs to get a hold of someone. Self-attested inspections. So like going back to a lot of the safety concerns, like, the requirements on a hotel for smoke detectors. I'm pretty sure like in homes now, you're required to have CO2 monitors or smoke detectors, whatever, but making these a requirement and then leaving it up to the owner to come in and say, hey, here's your inspection sheet. And I checked all this stuff out and I'm signing here and attesting that it's been done. An alternative is that a staff member goes out and does every one of these inspections, but that's a pretty hefty toll. It's pretty much a full-time job almost for a staff member. And then maybe it's, a staff member spot checks those. Somebody comes back and they said they did something that they didn't, then they get fined, they lose their license, whatever you come up with. Good neighbor guidelines, again, we talked about before, just implementing those, ironing out what they look like, and then putting that into the licensing process and making sure that people stick to them. And then collaborating with HOAs and covenanted communities. So this isn't saying, hey, we're enforcing these HOAs laws, but at least talking to HOAs. And if HOAs, whether or not we send them a list once a month of, hey, this is all the short-term rental addresses in the city. And if they find one within their jurisdiction or their zoning, then they can address it. It's up to them. And then finally, these are just other ideas that are a little bit more evasive, and you'll lose some of the benefits that we're getting from short-term rentals through these. Prohibiting non-owner occupied STRs in single family residential zones. My recommendation here would be to grandfather anybody that is. I mean, you guys saw the income that's coming in. People have quit their jobs. This is what they do now. So by grandfathering people in, you allow people that have been doing it to continue to do it. And then this is something that they do down in Colorado Springs. So there's no non-owner occupied in single or in residential zone unless they were in there prior to 2019, I believe. Prohibiting STRs in multifamily zones. So we kind of talked about the capacities and having potential different limits in different zones, but multifamily zones, that's where your most attainable housing is. So those being used as STRs really affects those attainable housing rates more so than a lot of the others. Minimum night stay was another idea that came out of the community discussion. So it's like saying, people that come up here for 2 nights, by having a 2 to 3 minimum night stay, that's going to push people into the hotels and out of the STRs. Because, hey, I can't come up on Friday night and stay at a STR. I'm going to have to go to the hotel or Friday and Saturday night because of that minimum stay requirement. That's going to be a pretty hard hit on some of the STRs, but it will push people into your hotels. So we should have about an hour left. Exactly. That is awesome. So for the rest of the time, if you guys want to have discussions between yourselves, ask us questions. And then just by the end of the hour, if you could please just give us some guidance on what you want next from us, whether it's another one of these meetings, you have questions that you want answered, or it's talking to Planning Commission.
So Rob,
thanks a lot.
There's a slide that you didn't talk about, the 2001 ZDP versus STR business license. I can't read the pretty colors. on this little tiny thing? Did you
So-
decide not to do that?
Yeah, you want me to address it?
I'm just, it's fine if you're
So,
not.
no, I hid the slide because it can be kind of confusing. Give me 1 second.
That's fine then.
It just printed out on your thing. But so what that slide is saying is that your ZDPs are, so in 2022, we have so far 34 zone development plans have been issued. And at the same time, 67 STR licenses have been issued. 21 numbers were, and this is the whole year, but 60 ZDPs and 50 short-term rental licenses.
So basically that's saying that the short-term rentals are. The short-term rentals are increasing faster than the current housing stock.
Yes.
Do you have any data on how many short-term rental licenses were not renewed, or that's just a net increase?
Yeah, so these were in the year. So yeah, like of those 50, I don't know that anyone, I don't, like in 2021, there were 50 short-term rental licenses. I don't know if
But you don't
anybody.
know what the total for the year was. I mean, we can look at your other chart, right, that showed the
Yeah.
totals. Oh, it's 188 now.
That's the total active for the year. Or that's the total issued in the year. Okay, so that's the total active in the year. Is 50.
And we're at 188 right now.
Correct.
So
Okay. Yes.
So the ones that aren't active any longer, is there any way to determine if they just chose not to come and renew their license and continue to operate, or what?
I mean, we would have to, I mean, it depends. And that's, I've explained to you guys how Muni Revs works for us, and they search for advertisements. So yeah, I mean, people could do it under the radar and we miss them and they could get by. But that's just, I don't know how often that
does that
happens.
ZDP number not include multifamily?
That's all residential, so. to
Okay,
include multifamily.
great.
So Rob, from year to year, when you issue a short-term rental license, do you track the ones that fall away and the ones that are new?
Can, yes.
You can't, and you haven't as yet?
We don't have any data on the cancellations.
Okay, and but they naturally cancel if they don't renew the
Correct.
next year, is
That
that
is
correct?
And it's always at the beginning of the year, or is it throughout the year?
Yes, I mean, the renewal would be at the beginning.
Okay, so if somebody started one today, regardless of the fact we have a moratorium, we would not know until January when it was time to get a business license.
No, when they get a new business license, it's as of that day.
So, but it renews in January. Okay.
Say that again, so it's not January each year for everybody?
Yes, it
But the question was, if somebody applies for an application today,
Right.
it would be effective today, not effective January of next year. It would be effective right now.
Correct, but it expires in January, right?
Correct.
So no matter when in the year you get it, it expires December 31st.
Correct.
Okay.
So Rob, in any of this discussion, has anybody discussed penalties for people that aren't getting business licenses or aren't following the rules?
No.
I mean, we could make the rules, and if it's not, they make more money by violating it, they're not going to care if there's no penalty involved.
So, and I look at Aaron
License
because we
revocation.
do, when
Yeah.
other businesses are delinquent, we do have a way of remedying that. Can you explain that a little
So
bit?
there's two parts to the question that you just asked. One is, if somebody's operating under the radar, do we have a penalty or even in a task force or anything to go out and find them? The answer to that is not currently. But to address the second part, if we find out that somebody's operating a business, let's say 6 months after the fact, there's penalty and interest that we will assess and we will ask them to go all the way back to when they started the business. So we would penalize them for that.
So we do have a means of a penalty.
Yes, yeah.
On the licensing fee and the revenues for sales and
On the
lodging
sales
tax.
and lodging tax. yes.
Right. Just help me understand, what effects does minimum night stay requirement have on anything?
So like I said, if, like right now, if there's no minimum night stay, so you have a lot of people just coming up for 1 or 2 nights on the weekends, and they're staying in short-term rentals. If you change that and created a minimum night stay, so you made the minimum night stay 3, 4 nights, then it's, if you were just coming up from the weekend, it would push you to a hotel and not to a short-term rental.
And what benefit is that?
So that's what I was saying, if it was a concern that the hotels were losing out of business or whatever, and you wanted to push them that direction, then that would be your tool to do so.
I would
And
see-
I have, in our research, I've also heard that having multiple night stays will bring a clientele that's a little bit more invested. If you have folks that are just going to stay for one night, a lot of times those are the folks that want to go and party and generally may be more of a nuisance. Now that's purely anecdotal. I don't have any data on that. But if you have people that are willing to fork out a little bit more money, you may have what Robert said, but also less likelihood that they're going to behave poorly. And then they have to be accountable for their behavior the next day as well.
Yeah, I think where we've mentioned that holding the owner accountable and making them be accountable for behavior of their clients, I think is where we kind of get at that kind of thing. Because they're the only ones that are going to be here after the weekend's over, or not physically here, but still be around. I guess it's up to the hotel. I mean, I know that, I don't look to the city or the government to drive business to me. I market myself and drive business to myself. So I think that's more the role of the hotels to kind of adapt to the changes in their market, not to be hateful by any means, but. And then the other thing that I just wanted to mention, collaborating with HOAs and covenanted communities, there are few. There are lots of covenants, but there are few boards that are active. Only a couple in our city limits. So having that as a tool might be a challenge. There's lots of covenants, but very few active boards. Just anecdotal information. Thank you.
I'd like to address the issue that Lee brought up and that Frank Connors has been most interested in. What's the whole effect of the zoning? Right now, it seems like, according to your interpretation or idea of it, it's commercial property only. So we've opened up zoning to allow anyone in any zone to have a short-term rental license. What's the pros and the cons of that?
That's the question. You're having to do all the subjects we're talking about on the table. Is it, whether it is in fact permitted or not permitted in the current? We need to sort out what the position is. So in anything we're talking about that's allowed here, it's going to be increasing the short-term rentals that are actually authorized by our ordinances. There's a very useful, I think the change in definitions that we've pointed out is very useful. One, owner occupied versus non-owner occupied. My own view on this is, for whatever, is that the city should not be proscribing short-term rentals in owner occupied properties. And that's whether it's renting a room out back or it's renting while they're off on vacation or snowbirding, whatever, to single-family residences are single-family residences. If it's a principal residence of someone, that's an appropriate use in a residential area. The non-owner occupied smell to me like commercial properties. Many of these issues we talked about, the ancillary concerns would be more likely to be a problem if it was non-owner occupied. And that's where the focus, and that's where the focus of the city should be, directing to what extent those are allowed and how they're regulated. But we should be expressly saying that owner occupiers can engage in short-term rentals of their property. I believe that is a baseline. I think it's also a question I asked right at the beginning is how many of those there are. I suspect that's a big chunk of the number we're talking about. I wouldn't be surprised if it's half or more. Just an understanding of that would limit the concerns that a lot of people in our community have, people who either on principle or just relying on the income from these things. It's important to them. If we could tell them that we're not going to prescribe owner occupied short-term rentals, a lot of the potential political heat concerns from this would dissipate. And it just seems to me this is the right way to go. So we should authorizing that and then talk about the non-owner occupied, what restrictions to put in, caps if you have them, other rules and such too. Sort of my sense, if that helps address what you're saying, that what we should authorize. So first part, let's get that in, and then let's focus on the other ones. What if the commercial ones in residential areas, how should they be controlled? If allowed at all.
So the question for city staff is it possible to separate out those numbers and give us an idea?
So separating out the numbers of owner occupied versus non-owner occupied.
Correct.
Yeah, like I said, that's like, if we change the way we collect information for these licenses, then I can do that. Right now, it's impossible without going out and just talking to each one of them.
Well, couldn't we look at the public record and see the owner is such and such of those 188 properties? The owner is such and such, and their address of record is such and such. And if their address of record is the same as the property address, you could conclude that they're owner occupied, correct?
So we could go through and look at, I guess, the county records and see who's at each address. But like on the license, it has like the business address and like a home address. Usually they're not the same. But then it's like, do they put a PO box down? Things like that. But yes, going through each one of them by cross-referencing it with the county assessors, then yeah, we can figure that out.
Many people.
There's probably some technical problems in doing that too, just because a lot of houses are owned by trusts.
Yes, that's what I was
and
going to say.
other sorts of things too.
And corporations and such.
And my comments weren't based on the fact that it is a majority or not a majority. It just seems to me it's the right thing to do to allow people in their principal residence to rent a room out back.
Sure.
It just.
So that's another thing too, that a lot of communities address are trusts. And then, so what they're doing is like these licenses are tied to a person and they're non-transferable. And then when they're gone, the license is gone. Because the issue is right now they're tied to a trust, or sometimes they tie it to the piece of property. Now that increases that one piece of property and not the others. But if it's tied to a trust and they're gone, or they sell the home or whatever, sell the trust, then that continues to go.
Well, I'll tell you that there are single families that buy a home in the name of a trust. And they live there and they have their family there. And many people hold their real estate in
And
trust.
so that was a question I kind of had for Nina that I haven't had a chance to ask yet, but it's like, even if someone owns a home that's in a trust, we should still be able to issue the license to a person, not the trust.
Well, there are
That's something
trustees.
our city attorney can deal with that. How you define, what someone's position needs to be considered to have at their principal residence includes if it's a principal residence of a trust in which they're a beneficiary. I mean, Nina will be able to deal with this without too much difficulty.
But your point, I think, is an important one going forward. I mean, if the first thing we address is definitions and code, in the definitions part of that new code, whether it's a paragraph or 2 or 3 or 4, is owner occupied versus non-owner occupied. And the only thing I might disagree with you on is calling it a commercial property, because commercial has the connotation of the commercial property tax. It's still.
I'm not necessarily saying you'd use commercial as part of your drafting language, but I think we met. Someone was a non-resident owner of a property with a number of rooms in it, and it's only used for that purpose. It's of a commercial character to me is one of the reasons why I thought it feels suitable for regulation based on concern with these ancillary issues, all from community character on through all the others.
But as a step going forward, though, I would think at a minimum, this collective group would recommend drafting a code that would address short-term rentals and take away the ambiguity that we have right now. And then if that's the first step, then what do we want in that code besides definitions? So we can give the attorneys some direction.
Well, there's something else on here that I think addresses community character. And that once you've decided on owner occupied versus non-owner occupied, then to me, the focus on the non-owner occupied, for a community character standpoint, I don't mind if there's somebody who lives here in Woodland Park and he owns or she owns 2 or 3 different short-term rentals. I don't have a problem with that at all. But here's what I have a huge problem with. When you look at the hedge funds and their investment in private property across the country, there's entire communities in Atlanta, for example, that are all owned by a rental company that is a professional hedge fund owned rental property company. And that, if that was to happen in Woodland Park, would totally destroy our community character.
So are you suggesting in this new code that we're going to come up with that we address that?
Yes.
And make that prohibited versus permitted? No corporate ownership or corporate operation of short-term rentals. I mean, I'm just throwing this out there again to have the noodle on the wall for the
Right.
lawyer to look at and say, okay, within Woodland Park, these are the most important things that we want to codify. The rest of it's gravy, coming up with, an affidavit for an owner to sign, making sure that they don't have 12 cars in the driveway versus 3. Our definitions have to do what we don't do now, and that's specify this is what a short-term rental is, and this is who can have a short-term rental. So if that includes some caveat or some part of the code that says no hedge funds or no corporations, fine, add it in there, but we need to give her a framework, him or her, whoever's doing this now, him or her a framework of what should be in the code.
Well, as the realtors have explained, a lot of people do own their personal property in a trust, a family trust, in an LLC, and I get that. But still, that's trackable to local ownership versus out-of-state ownership, corporate hedge fund ownership. And I think that it's important to our community character to keep that in mind, very much so, to stay control of our community. I think personally, I think it's
Oh, yeah,
important.
it's a great place to start if there's a way that can be codified, sure.
Yeah.
All I'm suggesting is let's come up with some kind of framework, some architecture for that code, whatever it may be.
I think we're going to have to define the level of what a corporation that we're defining is, because there are corporations that are people that live in our community that have 3 or 4 short-term rentals. And so to blanket a corporation is not allowed, isn't going to work, because people build business names and operations of a business based on what best suits what their business looks like and
Oh, I
behaves
agree.
like,
I
and
don't,
for tax
I-
purposes.
I'm not even
So-
going down that road. I'm just
Sure.
saying, what should be in the code besides frickin'
agree.
definitions? you
Well,
know?
Could I suggest that Nina, our city attorney, has worked for many municipalities and written actual
I
ordinances?
know.
So instead of us sitting trying to fix this, maybe we should just look at what she's already done from other cities and kind of.
I totally agree. We can go down this rabbit hole of all kinds of things.
Absolutely.
The key thing is to give some guidance, because
Right.
we've seen already from the survey, the cities run the gamut from what they do. And it's the same thing our city staff was looking for. They had a pretty good place to start on this list with some
Yes.
exceptions.
I like.
We need to, we need to give
Okay.
our city attorney some guide. Can we see something that reflects this? Maybe there's a couple options in that or something too, but something to give people something to look at and work from.
Karen would like to interject.
I would, please. And I value all of your conversation and your discussion. And, this is one of the few times you guys are all really in the same room to do some of this. And so to kind of help inform around what we start to draft, it sounds like, well, definitely definitions. And we were interested in updating the city code. Let's start with some easy ones. Should, well, no.
That was it.
No, there's others. Should we be requiring off-street parking spaces? Up or down, thumbs up, down, yay, nay?
Yeah, yes.
How can you
Wait, wait.
control, I would ask
no.
how you could control. a
Don't worry
public
about
right-of-way.
that. Don't worry about the how. I want to know, I'm trying to get into what we should
Well,
put into a
Karen,
draft.
is that
ordinance.
already covered somewhere else in the code?
Potentially, but I want to know if that's something we want to specifically tie to STRs as
Well,
potentially.
I
part of
I
the
would see
license.
yes with the understanding that on-street parking, if it's available, it's available. I mean,
CDOT controls public parking rights.
only on their highways,
On their highways.
Yeah.
not in the neighborhood.
In
And
the
that's-
neighborhoods, you can park generally anywhere of up to 72 hours.
That's what I was
by
gonna say.
recollection.
There's a
Yeah,
72
But as a
hour.
hour.
part
There's a
of
duration
STRs,
stated.
would you like this addressed in an ordinance?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so how about occupancy limits tied to like
Yes.
numbers? of
Before you
bedrooms?
move on to the next one, I just want to say sometimes less is better. And if you just have a set of guidelines that say STRs are required to blah, 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 and you don't make it so you put the onus on the city to have to enforce this on a regular basis where you're increasing manpower and all this sort of stuff. Some of the concerns that I've seen on this questionnaire, in the way it summarizes,
I know.
they can be simply resolved by a piece of paper or a what do you call it, plastic coated thing in the SDR, which says, here's the rules of the lay of the land here in Woodland Park. You are required to follow these guidelines. And if everyone posts some simple little flyer like that, you solve 70% of the concerns that are in the community. And you don't have to get into a bunch of legislation. So that's just a thought I have
No,
as you go through these.
agree.
Yeah.
And that's why this came up in the community discussion that I attended was, if it's already on the books, why add it? Unless we already have nuisance laws on the books. We already have street parking.
Maybe we
codes.
just reference it.
It's been
Reference it.
purely an enforcement problem, in my opinion. When you have problems of bad neighbors, and when you look at the municipal code and there's noise restrictions, parking restrictions,
Mhm.
yet they're violating them and there's no ramification, then it's not a legislative act that we should be pursuing. It's
Mhm.
a code enforcement problem. And what does the city need to be able to enforce the codes that are on the book?
And that might be the next step, once we come up with a concise new code addressing STRs, then we talk about, do we need to fund a new position for code enforcement? That's another discussion altogether.
So,
Well,
on-
I'm just saying I agree with both Robert and with Rusty that's the next step. Right now, we got to clean up our code.
So
Yeah.
just briefly, I just want to interject. At 6:30, there may be some people who'd like to do public comment. So at 6:30, I'm going to allow for about 10 minutes of public comment if there's anyone here or on Zoom, just so you guys know. Because there may be some people here who'd like to speak. Then the other thing I'm going to recommend is, if you guys don't mind, on page 9, under the staff recommendations, we've touched some of those. But if we could just kind of follow those and say yes or no, so staff has an idea that these are things we want addressed in that code. I mean, it's more than this, but to get started, so they have some sense of direction, if we could address these things. That's why I think Karen brought up the parking, because it was under the recommendation. So if we could kind of stay in that box for just a minute and get through that at least, that would be great. So we had the updating the code, separate STR licenses from business licenses. I think that's a good idea so that we can keep track of the short-term rentals under the licensing, so that we know it's short-term versus just a regular business. I don't know how you all feel about that, but I think that's obviously a a gimme. Set a cap on the short-term rental licenses potentially by zone. I don't know if any of us are interested in getting into the zone issue, or I think we have discussed the non-owner versus owner occupied. I think that that is a potential for capping. You know, capping at non-owners versus owners, like maybe we do 1% non-owner versus 3% owner occupied for a total of 4% cap. I don't know the.
The issue I have with the cap is what happens with the transfer of property that's been a short-term rental for 40 years.
Right,
And it's going to be sold and it's not suitable for full-time living. It's only good for short-term rental. But now you've got a cap.
right. And
The
that's
license is no longer transferable.
right. That's the other issue.
Yeah,
is do we
so I
let
just
the
want to
licenses
bring
be
that up, that
transferable?
that property becomes worthless to the owner then if he can't transfer it to be another short-term rental.
Well, the problem I have with the cap now with is these exempt current licensed STRs, we're already at 7.6%. So if we put a cap, these people they're gonna keep their license continually and we're never gonna get anybody new. And we're gonna be stuck at 7.6%. We're not gonna get to the 1 to 4% number. So I don't have a problem with the cap. I'm not real crazy about exempting them permanently. I mean, maybe you give them a year after or 2 years if they get their business license and then go from there, because they can divest or they can reapply. That one's a little gray for me at the
The
moment.
caps could be addressed in a code, and I think what Hillary is trying to do is, okay, go forth and make a new code for us. Are all of these items something we want addressed in the code? And
Right.
I
Yeah.
think we're collectively saying we don't want to address a cap, but I may be wrong.
Well, I would argue for a cap because that has a strong impact on maintaining the character of the neighborhood. I
Yeah,
mean,
Councilmember Nakai, if I could answer or say something to your statement.
Yeah.
So some of the things that they do, like when they do these caps, and like you said, we're at 7%. So if we capped at 5%, we would have to just keep going until we drop down below 5.
Right.
But so looking like a lot of these, how many of these 188 just got a license and then decided, hey, you know what, I really don't want into this business. So they're not even running it. So, we could look at it like, hey, you can't renew if you didn't rent it out so many months or so many days.
Yeah,
the year before.
that's the little fine stuff. That's
Yeah.
just my concern with the exemption portion of the cap. I don't have a problem with the cap.
Okay.
So,
I'd also recommend that with a cap, you also do a minimum setback between units. Short-term rentals, you'd have a 500-foot spacing between one STR and another. And that way it would maintain the character of that neighborhood.
but I think for the short term, I think we're good, Hillary.
Here's one thought I would ask everybody to think about when you talk about caps, because some people seem to be for a cap. There are those that are against a cap. We have not established, my question almost an hour ago, we haven't established what percentage constitutes good or bad.
Right.
I mean, we're at 7.6%. And Rob, you were just saying, oh, we can get it down to 5. Well, why do we need to go down to 5?
He wasn't saying we could get it.
I'm
down
just
to
saying
5.
his
He was saying
words were we could get it down theoretically. But we're talking about caps where we don't have any data to support what is the number is a good number for this municipality. I just ask you to keep that in mind when you're throwing out numbers, because it's a two-edged sword. You may be the one that owns a house right now and something occurs in your life that you need to move and you're stuck, where you might have a financial opportunity to go someplace to transition using your real property.
I agree with you, and I agree with Larry as well, but I think what Hillary's trying to push us towards is this going to be something that's going to be in our new draft ordinance, their draft code that we're going to ask the lawyer we can throw that in there and then
work on
fight
it.
over it later.
And then work on it later. Yep.
If I may, if you're okay with it, I don't hear any gross reaction to any of this on this slide. We can start drawing this up into a draft ordinance. We will also draft some straw man language around a cap. we could do some language around a spacing requirement, like I think a 500-foot radius is what we saw.
Colorado Springs.
Colorado Springs. is-
Colorado Springs.
yeah.
So we, if for next steps, then we are at 6:30, we can bring back a draft version of these and those things, then you all can have something to kind of go after
Okay.
and tweak around the edges.
Yep.
Does that
Is
work?
Everybody comfortable
And-
with that? Is there anything on this list that you feel has been left off that is crucial?
I don't think the minimum night stay is necessary, but that's just me.
I would agree
I
with
just
that.
am not
I would agree
convinced.
with that too.
What do you want to see, Fred?
Owner occupied, I don't see that up there. Backslide. Back ones, the two slides, right there. No.
Yeah, you kind of got it as,
I mean, you can change my mind.
yeah.
I'm just
So-
not sold.
Over here, like, this is kind of where we talk
Yeah,
about.
they're on the
non-
other
or
ones, yes, if they do
occupied
the
and residential
recommended
zones, or you can change that, mix it around, whatever you want.
No, I think we all agreed, we kind of wanted to do the owner occupied versus the non-owner occupied, right?
Yes.
I
Not
think having the
necessarily.
definition of it and
Yeah.
then,
I think
then we
definition.
can discuss caps or limitations. I also think the
Yeah.
corporation idea,
And then even
is it like
license.
BlackRock Corporation versus, a regular
Right,
LLC
yeah.
And
that's a family owned?
Nina and I were texting back and forth, and she said that she has placed that line in other cities that she's worked in. I
Okay.
don't know what that detail looks like, but we'll incorporate that as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, Nina has a lot of experience with this.
Anything y'all have talked about up here, she's done in a different jurisdiction, not all at once, but depending on which jurisdiction.
So I think-
We'll do these, and if we write something like, well, that's stupid, we'll just take it out, no problem, it's okay.
I think
Sounds good.
your recommendations are very good and the work you've done has been excellent.
Yep.
So I feel like I'm much better informed than I was at the last meeting. So thank you. And now I'm going to go ahead and allow for public comment if there's any. I see there are two here in the audience, and then do you have any on Zoom, Suzanne? Not just yet, so I would start with here. Sure. All right, Debbie, we'll go ahead and start with you. And I'm gonna try to keep it short, you guys, so I don't mean to cut you guys off speaking, but for the sake of time.
Good evening. Is it on? Okay, good evening. Debbie Miller, Woodland Park Chamber President. Couple of things I would ask. I saw some of the data tonight, looking at census.gov and the state demographer. The numbers just a little bit different. Maybe put all those together to look at numbers as far as actual housing stock, that sort of thing. But one of the things I haven't heard anybody talk about is economic development. And as you are looking at creating these guidelines for short-term rentals, and you've all said tonight, short-term rentals are business. And I'm all about representing business, but I'm all about fair and equity representation for businesses. And so we know the difference in the property tax, and that's state regulated. That has to be done at the state. I understand that. But just about the time the STRs were blowing up and coming, as Rob, you did your research with the Airbnbs and VRBOs and everything else, we had a local investor that put a lot of money into a brand new hotel in this region that has 60 rooms. So the chamber does do a lodging survey every couple of years. Woodland Park has commercial 160 rooms. I was really shocked tonight when I heard the number 188, because 2 weeks ago when we were here for the moratorium, that wasn't the number. So that told me there was a big drive in the STR business to get licensed. Mac was here two weeks ago, and he talked about commercial business. They have to come in, they're regulated. They have rules that they have to follow as far as their building codes. So when I see the self-attested inspection, I'm not comfortable with that. Because from a commercial standpoint, those are inspected. You know, do they have the CO detectors and the fire detectors and that sort of thing? Again, it's just trying to look at a level playing field. One of the things I have witnessed, because we have been active in this, at least since I've been here in 05, this is the first year that I've seen a vacancy rate in our hotel lodging. And we've seen consistently about a 20% vacancy rate. You can anecdotally say, are they going to STRs? What's happening? That's hard to gauge. I can just tell you that's there and it wasn't there before. One of the other things that since I've been here, we've always heard we don't have enough hotel lodging rooms. I can tell you our high season, Memorial Day through mid-September to end September, is always the high season. After that, those are the months that your commercial lodging has to make it. That's what they lived on. Lodging tax was implemented in 2002. It wasn't till I saw the recent lodging tax starting in January that I saw the significant difference in the breakdown. So I just wanted, as you're going forward, think about economic development from the standpoint, will there be a commercial developer who will want to come to Woodland Park and put a lodging facility here? I don't know that answer, but I think that has to be considered as you're writing this code and what goes forward with that.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a gentleman in the audience who'd like to come up. I'm sorry, I don't have a sign up list or know your name, but come on up to the podium.
John Myers here. I am a short-term rental owner. And just want to comment on several things that I heard tonight. Number one is, Rob, I love the idea of a laminated card. I think that goes a long ways towards enabling short-term rental owners to have a set of rules, regulations that our guests could live by. I would take it a step further and work with Airbnb, VRBO, those types of companies to actually maybe have that type of form on the booking model itself. So where they would actually, a guest would actually have to sign off saying that they would abide by those if they're going to be a guest. So I think that's a real plus. And I also support, to a degree, a minimum set of regulations, because I think there's real power in self-governance. So, you know, I would encourage that you take a look at that. A couple other things is the minimum stay. I think Kelly, you voiced some opinion on minimum stay. I would voice an opinion on there too. We've always had a standard 2-night minimum. It's just not worthwhile for us to do a single night, to charge a cleaning fee for a single night occupancy, and to have all the work that goes around turning a location and bringing that back up to speed for the next guest. So we've always had a 2-night minimum. I would say if there were a 3+ night minimum, it's a valid point that would drive some people to hotel space here in town. That could work. What that could also do is drive people to the point that it's like, I'm just going to look down valley. I'm going to look in El Paso County, and I'm just going to rent in El Paso County. I may not come to Woodland Park to spend money on restaurants and other activities because I can stay down valley or down the pass, and I can still go to Pikes Peak, and I can still be a tourist, but I'm not staying in Woodland Park now. My concern also is that, yeah, we do know occupancy rates in the hotels here. We know that they fluctuate, come up and down. That's a very valid point too. However, and a graph was shown earlier in the presentation that you showed, especially in 2020, occupancy rates, and we experienced this too, occupancy rate in our short-term rental shot through the roof. And the reason, and occupancy rates in hotels dropped. And the feedback that we got for that was that our guests did not trust hotels and bigger institutions to maintain and to clean to the degree that they trusted Airbnb hosted short-term rentals. And so that may not be the case here, but it did show on the graph there that we had a big peak in 2020 with people staying in short-term rentals versus staying in hotels. And so that's something to consider as well. Our guests expressly had stated that they didn't feel good about going into a lobby of a big hotel where there were lots of people there and be assured that they weren't going to get COVID because of that exposure. And so that's a COVID example, but I think it's a valid example as well. And then just one other point. One other point I wanted to make was just the expression on one of the graphs about parties and negative connotation that Airbnbs, or not Airbnb, short-term rentals support a lot of partiers. And that's destroying neighborhoods because of excess cars and partiers. We've been in the short-term business for a while now and had probably well over 250 different guests that have come through our short-term rental. We've had one instance where we had a young lady come from Kansas who came out for her 21st birthday. She didn't express it that way, but she came out for her 21st birthday and filled up the place with partiers. Our neighbors, who we also worked with to make sure they knew we were short-term rental owners. And we made sure that they knew how to get a hold of us. Sent me a picture of a bunch of kids kind of hanging outside, not looking so good, cars up and down the street. We immediately responded. Within 10 minutes, we were there and we kicked them out. We sent them packing. They were only there one night and they hauled out 5 garbage bags full of trash on their way out. And so it happens, but what I'm here to say is, at least in our experience, that was an exception, that simply did not happen. We're also priced at a point that discourages that. So the typical 21-year-old party can't afford to spend, what we're charging on a nightly basis. And so, we look to filter that out, of course, and Airbnb and VRBO assists with that in asking for proof of identification and filter some of that out. It's not 100%, and those types of things can happen. But I just wanted to let you know, from my perspective anyway, it has not been an issue. And I noted in your presentation that people appeared at the community involvement pieces to express their negative experiences. I don't know if you had anybody that took the time to come and express their positive experiences, because typically people tend to focus on the negative. And I think there's a lot of positive there, and has been a lot of positive experience as well. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Suzanne, anyone online?
No one signed up online.
Okay.
So
Council
I have
or
a follow-up question
Sure.
for Deb, actually. Deb, there's reports now from not VRBO, but short-term rental owners here in Woodland Park that say they've been approached by the Marriott Inn. Marriott's looking to create a model to utilize short-term rentals in their business model. So are you aware of that? And then as a trend for some of like the microtels, et cetera, is there a way business is going that we should be aware of that could affect the quality of life in our community when the big corporates start plugging into short-term rentals as a part of their business model?
Councilman Zulaga, last council meeting was the first time I had heard about the Marriott approaching Airbnbs, VRBOs for that. So it's not something I've heard out in the industry. It may be something that's kicking up and may be new. Again, that would be something that you all would have to look at as far as quality of life characteristics of the region and that sort of thing as well. I do want to correct one thing from the former gentleman. If you look in 2020, hotel occupancy was great. Everybody got out of the big city and came to us because they wanted to go to the mountains. So there was no bad vacancy rate for them in 2020.
Rob, you
Councilman
wanted to-
Zalora, to answer or to talk about what you said. So what we've seen is Marriott is sort of starting to act like a VRBO or an Airbnb. They're not purchasing property, but they're advertising short-term rentals for people, just like Airbnb and VRBO.
Yeah, in their hotels. Is that what you mean? Or you mean?
No, like if you go
Their
to
building.
Marriott, like you can look for property in Woodland Park and you'll see about 10 homes come up. But those homes are also on Airbnb and VRBO. It's just
Gotcha. So
advertising.
they're just
for the-
doing,
Yeah.
It's a
servicing
platform.
it.
Right.
Got it.
So they pay a fee for.
So yeah, the
Having that
SCR owner
exposure.
pays Marriott a fee for advertising.
Showing
They do, and they have different requirements and everything else that goes with being one of their represented on their site.
I can get my
Anything further?
Marriott points staying at a Airbnb or.
Right?
I didn't know that.
Get your
Whole new
HD
world.
points. Okay,
Well, the question is, does the software the city uses, will they be able to track that?
Yes, MuniRevs is on that.
Okay.
so anything further to staff? Staff, do you guys feel like you have a set of directions that you can work towards? It sounds like we're probably gonna need another work session. And be mindful of the 90 days.
I would just ask that the planning commission, the council and the staff take into consideration the suggestion about economic development that Debbie raised, just as a thought as we're thinking through this, because it's a valid point. Thank you.
Anything further? No?
We,
Michael?
we may, don't hold me to this, but we may try and bring this back for your October 18th meeting. I'm not quite sure yet, but we are, of course.
October?
Are you talking
Did I say
August?
October, I'm sorry, August.
I'm like,
No, He's like, I
It's
don't
been
know
a
how to do
day.
90 days.
August 18th, I'm sorry. We do have another work session scheduled for August 4th, so we'll try and do the 18th. I think that will give our attorneys some time to draft that up.
Okay,
Like I said, don't hold me to it, but tentatively we can shoot for that.
great.
thank you.
All right,
Thanks, you guys.
yeah. All right,
Thank
this
you
work
all.
session will be
Thank you all.
adjourned.
Very helpful.
Thank you.